I couldn't function, I could hardly sleep, I couldn't eat, because at the end of the day, you're kind of killing yourself.
I was deeply overwhelmed by it for all of my freshman year.
I didn't really have a future in mind. I thought I would maybe make it to 20.
Mental health among Gen Z is a travesty.
Most of the adults were worried I would be in hospitals forever and not really be a functioning human.
Almost every other person I know has some sort of mental health problem.
I was scared of what the day was going to bring me.
It just kind of radiates outward and outward until everything around you is destroyed. Let me think about this. How does this begin? Kind of went against my parents' will, and this was like, I'm going to California. And when I came to America, the very first day I landed in LAX and went to like the first gas station, I remember like the cashier inside the store just like waving at us, and I was so taken aback. I was like, are you waving at me? Because in other cultures, the level of friendliness wasn't that sincere and that deep. My initial perception of America was that it was the friendliest country I have ever been to. So, first goal was to go to college. That was my main immediate goal, and that's what would make my parents take me seriously. So I decided to go to an art school, the Art Institutes of California. I had a lot of potential. I was very conscious of that. I seen what my parents had achieved in their lifetimes, in their day and age. I was full of self-confidence when I was 18. But while I was in college, that disintegrated.
On a bad day, it could be like so anxious and overwhelmed, I can't even talk, not really knowing what's real, sending my friends crazy, incoherent texts and they think I'm high, wandering around at night with my shoes off. Those moments are really terrifying because I really do feel like I don't quite know what's real. I get really paranoid, but mostly it's just stressful and exhausting, and I don't understand what's going on and I don't know what to do. I had my first depressive episode when I was 8, and things sort of kept getting worse in middle school. By the time I was in high school, I was out for a year of school in different treatment centers, and then finished high school somehow, and then another year in treatment centers and hospitals, so it's been a wild ride. The treatment centers probably saved my life, but were also really hellish. I ended up being sort of tossed from place to place because they couldn't figure out what was going on with me, and I had these increasingly scary and chaotic episodes of what seemed sort of like psychosis or really intense dysregulation. And eventually I ended up at a place where a doctor suggested maybe you're on the spectrum and gave me a checklist of autism symptoms, and I think I threw it right back at her. It seemed crazy to me and I didn't even want to think about it.
I chose audio production. Creating music, producing music. I translated the financial into like the quality of education. So I thought, I'm paying a lot, so they're definitely teaching me like the golden rules for life. I really, really believe that my professors were like an extension of my parents, and I took everything they said to heart, like almost to a religious degree.
When I had first gotten the autism diagnosis, I rejected even the possibility that I might have it because it just seemed like yet another thing wrong with me. And then I saw that the treatment I was getting wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't had the diagnosis. And so I started to go from kind of hating this part of myself to accepting it. It finally seemed like being myself would be acceptable.
So I believe my focus was just gonna be on the audio. All the classes would just be audio specific. But not too long into my college journey, I was introduced to ideas such as microaggressions.
Microaggression is a term used to describe remarks or actions that imply negative associations and insults toward an individual or group. These are often directed at members of historically marginalized groups.
And so through all of the teachings, I was viewing a lot of interactions through the lens of microaggressions.
Have you heard or even said any of these common microaggressions? Wow, you're so articulate. Can I touch your hair?
I began to see myself through the lens of Black and a woman. It was like everything that I tried to do would always be met with opposition. I specifically remember the day, gray clouds outside, it was raining, and I remember the moment I was like, is this true? Is what they're saying like real? Is this how the world works? And then I was like, I accepted it. I was like, I think this is real and I need to wake up and grow up and just adopt this. Like, this is how the world works. And that day, it felt like something dark, like, entered my heart. And it was very vivid and very real. And I was like, the world's a lot darker than I thought it was.
Getting into Stanford was one of the only good things that happened to me that spring. And once I had that concrete goal in mind, I decided I need to figure out how to get my life together so I can actually do this. And some of the doctors told me, like, you're not going, in 2 months, you're not gonna go from like a locked psych ward to Stanford. That just doesn't happen. And that made me want to do it more. College gave me the motivation to learn how to live independently. It wasn't just that I hadn't been independent, it was I hadn't even been in a room alone for like 10 months. So it was really terrifying, but I also finally had a really compelling reason to be done with hospitals and have a somewhat normal life. I was terrified every day, but I was also really determined to make it happen.
I thought that the only way that I was gonna get ahead was by acknowledging my victim status in society. And so in order to kind of compete and get the best grades, I sort of showed how much of a victim I was in order to impress my professors, in order to seem like I understood their concepts the best. Because they had me believing that the only thing I could turn to was my skin color and my sex.
Ableism is discrimination against disabled people, and as with most of these social justice terms, it's a very real phenomenon. But I think I also use the term ableism to describe basically things where I felt personally misunderstood or mistreated. Ableism almost described any situation where I felt excluded, except I felt excluded by most things at this point. And there had been a lot of situations where I was essentially told to shut up because I didn't belong to XYZ marginalized group, and therefore I wasn't really entitled to an opinion on the subject. And so I now had something that would make people listen to what I had to say more and give me a little bit more authority and give me power. And I don't think of myself as power hungry or anything like that, but I think it is kind of natural human instinct to want more power.
You expect everyone to think like you And if they don't, you push them away.
When I started to use the vocabulary of like marginalized, intersectional, hegemonic, blah, 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 people just kind of smiled a little bit more.
You share these religious ideas about the world.
And I started feeling like I was part of an in-group.
You know how the world works through the virtue of just being oppressed.
It was just very clear to me that if I was an activist, I was going to be accepted more. It's just really exciting to think that like this whole world is out to get you, but you are the hero, like you're Katniss Everdeen. She plays in these evil Hunger Games and she takes down the dystopian republic. She's like really good with bows and arrows, and she's also conveniently very pretty, and like why wouldn't you want to be her?
My professor's media, Twitter, I would just follow their command.
I was engaged in this wild crusade to save the world from the scourge of ableism.
Any person who needed to be canceled, I was ready to do their bidding.
I was ready for a fight, ready to react.
.400 other students come, like 500, like they're all coming to college for the first time. And first of all, I think I was just overwhelmed, like by just the sheer number of white people. Like I just hadn't met any. I'm coming from the biggest black nation on earth. And then it's just like, you know, I've met white people there, I've seen a few there. I was in New York for a couple of days, so I'd seen a couple. But this was just like straight white people, like everywhere I turned. And I was like, what is going on here? I'm Josh, I'm James, I'm Jake. I turn around, I can't recognize any of them. Like, I can't tell them apart. It's really bad, really, really bad. Let's put it this way. You're coming to America in the fall of 2016 from Nigeria. Donald Trump is about to be elected president. The tension on campus, you can literally cut it with a knife. And I'm out here like, who's Donald Trump? What is left? What is right? Who is liberal? What is conservative? Like, I'm coming in zero knowledge of political America. So I grew up in Abuja. We weren't poor, but we were just right above that not poor line. I grew up Muslim. Every morning, you know, this routine was simple. School in the morning, you would go to school from like 8 a.m. till 4 p.m., leave school, change clothes in the car, and then you would go to Islamia in the evening from 4:30 to like 6, and then get back home, have dinner, do your homework, and then rinse and repeat for like 13, 15 years. So there's this picture in my mind, the Oxford University debates.
I now look to the first speaker, member of Secretary's Committee, Sarah Dubé, St. Hugh's College, to open the case for the proposition.
Someone would go up and then be like, this is what I think, blah, 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 blah.
Today, the opposition will tell you that this genetic engineering will herald a new, improved age for humanity.
You would be like, oh my God, you know, like, so I had this vision of Western education as a whole, not just American education, as sort of being like, okay, regardless of how controversial, sort of like, you know, whatever it was, let's go, we're gonna argue it out, we're gonna hammer it out. This is the picture that I have of what American college is gonna be like. Lafayette at this time, it's not an easy, you know, place to be at. One, on social media, but also on campus, on social media to start with.
Social media, social media.
If you say this, it means something. If you don't say this, it means something.
Social media played a large role in my view of the world.
If you like something, it means something. If you don't like something, it also sends a certain signal.
A very, very huge role, especially Twitter.
Oh my gosh, Tumblr.
And Lafayette is Facebook.
I hopped onto Twitter in 2009, and I was just using it to follow my favorite artists and bands.
I got into Tumblr because I just wanted to meet other autistic people online and hear about their experiences and not like feel as alone. And it was really great in that sense. But then there was this really kind of fierce activist side of things.
And before I knew it, it was the only way I had a grasp on what's happening in the world.
So liking or not liking.
Checking it every 10 minutes.
Or sharing or not sharing has all these social implications.
For a lot of the friends that I had, I would analyze everything they were doing, their interests, people they followed. Oh, I remember there was this one guy who was following Ben Shapiro on Twitter. That was enough for me.
Your job as an adult is to guide your child through life, not to sit around waiting for your child to tell you what they think their gender is.
And when I saw that, I couldn't talk to them again because I knew if they could do something as horrible as follow Ben Shapiro on Twitter, like what more are they capable of?
So I think the biggest confusion that hit me was just the weird, lack of, grinding intellectual discourse. It felt as though all the conversations that were being had, all the debates that were being had were still very limited to a certain group of pre-approved or pre-agreed upon ideals, which tend to lean left. That was the consensus. And, debate should not stray from that consensus.
I became convinced that if someone used the phrase person with autism, my brain would immediately go to, they think that autism can be separated from the person. Well, that means that they want autism to be separated from the person, which means that they want autism to be cured, which means that they want people with autism not to exist. And that is eugenics, which amounts to genocide. So just 3 words, person with autism, and I would immediately be thinking about genocide. That is not healthy.
I tried to do whatever I could to curb the existence of white supremacy and the roots of white supremacy, which to me seemed to be coming from certain Twitter accounts, such as Ben Shapiro, Ann Coulter, and this guy Mark Dice or whatever. And I was like, why are they on Twitter? How have they not been banned yet? And I thought that was just a function of no one's actually taking the initiative to report them. So I would sit down all the way through the night trying to look for tweets where there was a call to violence. So if Ben Shapiro would tweet something violent, I would look for that in his timeline and report that. Even if it bounced back and said it wasn't violent, I'll try again.
I remember this was probably November when Ben Shapiro was coming to campus, and it was this big thing because it's Ben Shapiro, and there were flyers absolutely everywhere. And they said Ben Shapiro's presence threatened the lives or the safety of marginalized community members. And I think my first thought was this is extreme, this is ridiculous. And then there was well, you're privileged, you're white, you're not one of these groups, you can't tell other people how they experience the world. You're probably just drawing on your implicit racism. You need to listen to people's lived experience. This instant chorus of stuff that made me feel like I shouldn't question it. Not just that I shouldn't question it, but that it was morally wrong for me to disagree, even in my head.
Coming to America and finding people so defined by their politics is absolutely abnormal. In Nigeria, politics is very simple, We don't have left or right. Everyone is just corrupt. And then you just decide which level of corruption you're going to be on. I'm coming in, and I think a lot of international students are coming in and are like, why? Why are we all so annoyed? Why are you screaming?
I was at a Bible study with a lot of other youth my age, but of different backgrounds, like white, Hispanic. However, I was the only black person. And I just remember sitting there and taking into account everything that was happening. I was conscious of someone scooting an inch away from me, and that was a subconscious microaggression. Or if someone would say hello to someone else, I would interpret that as another microaggression. How are they forming their sentences? Are they walking on eggshells because there's a black person here?
Yes, sir.
2016 was the year that I came to know of BLM and a lot of the shootings that had taken place of unarmed black men at the hands of the police.
Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out.
So I was particularly traumatized by the shooting of Philando Castile.
We got pulled over for a busted tail light in the back.
So I would cry a lot about that. At the same time, Trump was running.
We are going to win again. all the time.
And I just, in my mind, I couldn't conceive that it was even possible that he would win. I thought Hillary had it in the bag. I was like, the world's gonna be saved. But then I went to my pastor's house to watch the election, and I just remember seeing like all the states turn, and it was like so scary. It was like really, really scary. And then everyone in the house was like celebrating.
The President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
When Trump got elected, that's actually a really traumatic memory for me. It really freaked me out because I was convinced that I was gonna die.
How was that going to happen?
Honestly, I didn't know how I was gonna die. It was what CNN was saying, it's what Twitter was saying. So however way it came, through starvation, through lack of opportunities, it was gonna come. The night Trump was elected, I could not sleep. I had to stay up and just make sure that the results were wrong, because I was certain that there was like a glitch or like a counting issue. So I stayed up, I kept my eye on Twitter, I kept my eye on the news, and the next day I went to school. The first people I turned to were my professors. I was like, it's wrong, right? Like he didn't win. Like it was, they messed up somewhere, right? This one professor was like, no, it's done. Like he's the president. And I just remember beginning a new reality where the world was that much more dangerous. I could hardly sleep, I couldn't eat. Anxiety attacks, trembling, tremors, nervous breakdowns, sleepless nights, insomnia.
I, was trying to be as virtuous as I could. So I joined all the social justice groups, even though I didn't really understand this sort of social justice. We had this protest and they were inviting people up to speak, and me trying to be all cool and be all virtuous and trying to show support and everything. So I made this metaphor. I didn't make it, but I sort of stole it from my father. It was like, blackness is not a skin color, it's an attitude to life. If you believe in, fundamental human rights, because black people have been so long denied it, you are black in that sense. I go up there, feeling all cool with myself. Da 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 da. If you're white, you can be black. If you're black, you can be purple, or whatever it is. I'm like, everyone can be black. And what happened after that, a lot of people I thought I was tight with just stopped talking to me. My battle with, beginning to feel depressed at Lafayette started at the end of my freshman first semester. It's a confluence of a number of factors. One is, you're coming from a very, very different cultural background, and you're meeting a new culture that's sort of telling you to change. Like, not change a little, but change radically. This is who you have to be. The second was just the nature of conversation on campus. No room for debate, no room for conversation. You wake up every morning and everyone's screaming at you, you're this, you're that. And it's not like they're screaming at you, but you can imagine them screaming at the version of you that would have said certain things. Felt like I couldn't live a true life. What I thought to be true, I would keep in my head and then say something else. I would see that disparity between the me that was being presented and the me that was in my head. And that self-silencing way put me in my own head. So I was talking to myself alone and just really, really, really getting into a dark space where, I would wake up every morning and be like, what the hell am I doing here? What the hell am I going for here? Why am I in college? I might as well just, peace right now, because what the hell am I doing? I couldn't consistently live in that culture of, vitriol and, more than anything, hate. There's a Wawa convenience store right across the road. There's no stop signs on that road. So I would just be walking down and I would always just wish that, a car would just run me over and I'd just graciously die. Because, in that sense, if I died, I wouldn't feel the guilt of taking my own life, my parents being sad about it. It'd just be like, no, I left.
I'd gone to the hardware store right across from my house to get, to get wire, to tie around a bag. I decided that if I ground up all my medications and took them all and put a piece of wire around my neck and with a the bag, I could knock myself out, and then if I were to wake up from the drugs, I'd suffocate. So I just wanted to make it foolproof. It felt desperately important. It wasn't something I could wait on. It was something that I needed to do while I still had the will to do it. And it didn't so much seem like I had to do it in order to stop feeling pain. It was something more like I was bad and I was broken and I had to go. It's really crazy what your brain can sort of convince you of. I actually thought, I thought things like my family would be happy for me. I'd gotten so depressed, but so warped in my thinking that I actually thought that my sister's a doctor, that if I'd asked her to help me kill myself, she'd help me. By the time you're at the stage where you're gonna kill yourself, you're not in your right mind, and I was not myself. It's hard to really describe how I felt when I got checked into the psych hospital, partially because there's such a constant feeling of terror. It smelled really bad, of course, and the people were pretty stern. I was kind of afraid of some of the attendants, and it was funny because you'd have moments in there where you'd be like watching TV, and I remember like changing the channel and having a moment that felt almost kind of normal, and then having one of the girls who was in there come back and just burst into hysterical tears because I'd changed the channel. Even that little glimmering second that things felt slightly normal, it was a reminder that where it was.
So I've always been really partial to folk wisdom and quotations from the ancients, because ideas from previous generations get filtered through the generations. People 1,000 years ago weren't smarter than us, but the only things we get from them are the really smart things. So Greg had asked to talk to me because years before, when he was struggling with his own depression, he had read my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis. And that's a book about 10 ancient ideas. I read the wisdom literature from the entire world. So one day, Greg emails me and asks if we can go to lunch. And we have this lunch that really became life-changing.
So I'm recovering from suicidal depression in 2008, and at the same time I'm learning about cognitive distortions. This is when I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy. It was recommended by my sister-in-law, and it's no stretch to say it saved my life.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is the most widely practiced, most efficacious, general kind of therapy for treating mood disorders, depression, anxiety, and a lot of other disorders that are related to those. It was discovered by Aaron Beck and a few others in the 1960s, they discovered that their depressed patients would go in these cycles. They would ruminate. They would say these distorted thoughts over and over again, like, this thing went wrong, and it went wrong because I'm stupid, and I'll always be stupid, and this always happens to me. And he would try to argue with them. And he found that actually, if you can get them to interrupt those thoughts, then at least temporarily, the pain goes away. They get a little bit of relief.
It's deceptively simple. What you're supposed to do is, when you have like a really strong negative reaction to something, you're supposed to sit down and write down what the initial thought was and what the evidence was of that thought, and then pick a cognitive distortion. And cognitive distortions are mental exaggerations. They're things that everybody's brain does that distorts the way reality looks like. So for example, a really common one is binary thinking, that either everything's horrible or everything's great. There's no shades of gray. There is catastrophizing, of course, which is, like a date doesn't go well and you think it's over for you, that you're never gonna find anybody.
The amazing thing is that Beck's discovery was actually widely known in ancient Greece and Rome, in ancient India, and almost all the wisdom traditions of the world recognized that we have these distorted thoughts, and if you can teach yourself to see reality more clearly and break those thought cycles, you get relief from the suffering.
And unless you actually make a habit of it, you're never going to reach the point where your brain starts talking back to those negative voices that you have in your head. And that's why it kind of snuck up on me. I was doing it several times a day for months and months and months, and at times even wondering like if I was making real progress. And I remember sometime in the fall of 2008, having that little narrative about being broken, pop up in my head, and it just didn't feel true anymore. And in a relatively short period of time, given how intense it was amazing like how much ground I was able to gain back over these things that I'd struggled with my whole life. I'm the president and CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We defend free speech and free thought on campus and off. Since I work in higher ed, I'm on campus all the time. And I'm looking on campus and I'm like, wow, it's kind of like administrators are telling students to catastrophize, to engage in binary thinking, to do all these things that I was taught not to do. They've disinvited hundreds of speakers to protect students from ideas or speech that might upset them. Even James Franco got canned. Administrators have cracked down on inappropriately directed laughter, harsh texts or emails, and lots of other speech crimes. Colleges provide websites and phone numbers so students can report people who offend them, even anonymously. Administrators teach students that they're fragile and in constant danger and can be permanently harmed by words. This is not a kind or compassionate thing to teach people. But from 2008 to about 2013, I was like, well, administrators seem to be selling all this catastrophizing, all these cognitive distortions, but at least students aren't buying them. They were kind of rolling their eyes at what administrators wanted to tell them. But then, right at the end of 2013, but all the way through 2014, it was like lightning hit. It was just completely different on campus, and suddenly students were popping up on campus who were making arguments that, frankly, to me, sounded a lot like cognitive distortions.
In 2012, there was none of this, and by 2014, 2015, there was a lot of it.
It was an extremely rapid and very troubling shift.
Suddenly, just in the last few years, Greg says, students on campuses around the country are being taught to catastrophize, to overgeneralize, to make mountains out of molehills.
And if they keep going this way, this awful worldview is going to make them depressed.
And it was like, boom, oh my God, this is what is happening. I thought Greg's idea was brilliant. And so I said to him, Greg, you've got to write this up. You've got to write this up, like as an article, like for the Atlantic or something. And if you want some help, like if you want a psychologist along to help you with the psychology terms, I'd be glad to join as the second author.
Are you kidding? I told John I'd love to work with him. I was already a huge fan. And that was it, the beginning of the collaboration.
So, we write the article, first draft in late 2014, we submit it in 2015, goes through editing, comes out in August. It gets a lot of attention.
The coddling of the American mind.
How good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure.
You write about that adolescent anxiety and depression are unlike anything seen in modern times.
I don't agree that when you become students at colleges, have to be coddled and protected from different points of view.
A few months later, all hell broke loose, beginning at Yale.
Who hired you? You should step down. If that is what you think about being a professor, you should step down. It is not about creating an intellectual space. It is not.
Things heat up even more in early 2017. Violent protests at Berkeley.
Mayhem on campus.
At Evergreen State College.
What about our protection right now?
Basically took the president of the university hostage. They wouldn't even let him go to the bathroom.
So I call up John in 2016 and say,
the problem's getting worse. We have to turn this into a book. I realized, okay, you know what? This is actually the problem of our age. This is a whole generation going off the rails.
I think it's really important to have great sympathy for younger people today because they're just doing what older people are telling them, like this idea that they're always in constant danger, that words will permanently harm them, and that they're much more fragile than they actually are. We're taking these brilliant, hardworking, amazing kids and teaching them that they're capable of much less than they actually are.
So throughout the early 2000s, and even as late as 2015, 2016, We all thought that our students were millennials, the millennial generation.
And what we discovered early on was that this was a whole different generation hitting campus, which is now known as Generation Z. People born 1996 or later.
They are really different from the millennials, much more depressed, anxious, and fragile. Interpreting generational change is a really tricky art. And you look at almost any indicator and you see, well, you know, it's going up a little bit here, or no, maybe it's going down a little bit here, and you know, where do we cut it off? You almost never see elbows. You almost never see a hockey stick. You never see a line like this, except in 2012. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, teenagers, especially girls, they start rising very quickly. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
An argument that comes up all the time is just, oh, they're just more open about anxiety and depression. And that argument doesn't really hold up to the data, because not only has anxiety and depression gone way up among people from Gen Z, hospitalizations for self-harm, suicide attempts, and successful suicides have gone up just the same amount. So when John and I set out to write the book, we faced this huge mystery. Why are Gen Zers so anxious and depressed? And the whole book is trying to figure out what's so different about them and why.
At the end of my freshman year, I go back home. I think one of the things that once I get home, the first thing that really hits me is just freedom. Like, I wasn't trying to pretend to say what I thought or not say what I thought. It was just like, while I was there, I was with me. I remember food really helped. I don't know why, but I just found Nigerian food again, and I was like, oh my God, you are me. We have gotten back to our element. I told my parents, I didn't tell them, the full details, but my parents, obviously they know their son. They could tell I was like deeply sad. My parents were like, consider going back, just give it another shot. It's bad when, your dream is to go to American school and like you come back and you're like, it's not for me. I'm not going back there.
I found out that George Floyd died from an email. It was from the student staff in my dorm. It came with trigger warnings, of course. The tone was very somber. We're here for you in this horrific time of violence, brutality, racism, everything. There was this barrage of emails from, it seemed like almost every department. Group chats were overflowing with like, these are the bail funds, these are things you can do. It was so much pressure to take all these actions and to adopt these perspectives without asking any questions. It kind of sent me into a tailspin. I was anxious, I felt guilty constantly. I couldn't stop thinking about the whole white privilege thing. The only good thing to do was to be anti-racist, which involved counting my friends and tallying the number of black, white, brown friends I had, and then making sure to make enough friends so that I had those numbers even. It meant making sure I didn't read too many books by white authors or listen to the wrong kind of music. I was really torn on rap because I didn't know if that was appropriation or appreciation. Even in my own writing, because I write fiction, I couldn't write about characters of color because that was appropriation. But I also couldn't write only about white characters because that was bad. I essentially couldn't write about anyone whose identity wasn't exactly the same as mine. But then I would just be populating my stories with many versions of me, which sounds incredibly boring. I attended this vigil for George Floyd. It was a Friday evening. Usually I would be going to Shabbat services, but this seemed more important. I guess maybe that tells you something, that it started to seem almost spiritual, religious. It started with the organizers saying something about how you might not feel comfortable here, and if so, you're probably part of the problem. And I absorbed that message, absorbed the idea that I was part of the problem, and I felt like attending this vigil was part of this atonement for what I had done wrong, and I guess what I had done wrong was just being white.
When I came back in my sophomore year, it didn't go away, like the campus culture being very vitriolic, and I just slipped right back into where I was. One thing that began to help, I had found Jonathan Haidt. He spoke about why people felt so deeply, moved and pulled by politics. As a coping mechanism or whatever it was, I delved deeply into Jonathan Haidt's work, watched over like 200 hours of his videos on YouTube. Like, you know, I was really just trying to understand what the hell was going on, and like this guy seemed to have it figured out.
I don't want to say that COVID had a silver lining, but I think leaving campus and being at home was kind of a turning point in emerging from the advocacy phase. In the summer of 2020, I was at home and surrounded by my thoughts. In high school, my friend and I started the Kindness Club. It involved a lot of lollipop distribution. Her whole thing was always kindness as a way of life. And with all of this activism, it was becoming increasingly clear to me that I had strayed from my goals of kindness, compassion, genuine social justice, and that these set of thought processes was really unhealthy and was making me miserable. And I didn't want to keep going with that. I wasn't really sure what the alternative was until a friend sent me a link. I was astonished to find that there were Black thinkers writing about race and sharing ideas that I never heard on campus. I listened to a lot of The Glenn Show with John McWhorter, Glenn Lowry. That was great. I got really into Titania McGrath, the fictional activist. I read Coddling of the American Mind and was like, oh wow, this is exactly what's been happening to me. It was this whole new world of ideas that's opened up to me, and it was so exciting to feel like I was thinking for myself again.
I started these YouTube skate park reviews to highlight the vibe of skate parks and how safe they would be for marginalized groups. Anyone who doesn't fit the traditional straight white male identity. Are they going to hate that a Black woman's in their territory? Will they literally pick up a skateboard and attack me? Whereas prior, when I was 9, that didn't even occur to me as a possibility. And now it was an everyday question. Is this the day? Are they gonna attack me now? One day, I decided to do a review of a skate park in Orange County that I hadn't dared gone to. I was afraid of Orange County to begin with, just because it was notoriously conservative. So just going into Orange County was kind of scary for me. I tried to go in with as clear of a mind as I could, in order to really show how hateful and mean these people were without my provocation. So I go with a friend of mine who's also woke, be classified as a marginalized person as well, and would also be someone that I could, if anything happened to me, I would have a witness on hand. We skated our hearts out, and I noticed that a few pros were there. I interpreted their fury and their energy as their training, and I'm done, my energy's gone, and I'm this was a really great place. I turned to my friend and wasn't that a really cool skate park? And to my surprise, my friend was no, I had a really scary time. And then my friend explained to me that some of the pros were looking at her funny, and that was interpreted as aggressive. My friend and I went into the exact same skate park, and we came out with 2 completely different experiences. That was when I knew there was a way that I was looking at the world that wasn't right. I was the one inflicting pain on myself, and it was robbing me of happiness.
As I started writing this email, it was a grueling 6-7 hour process. Not because I wrote for 6 or 7 hours, because I reread everything I wrote. The reason for that was I'm not living in oblivion. I know when I click that send button, my life is going to be pretty different. And so I wanted to make sure if I do this, I do it right. First thing when you enter Michigan is people raising their hands like this and trying to point where in Michigan they live. And to an immigrant, this was as if they're taking the oath. And it was so weird. You ask, where are you from? And their hands go up. So that was my first sort of welcome to Michigan, learning what this means and where I am. So Alma College is right here. I was dead set on getting jobs and completing the number of hours I could work to earn as much money as I could, because I really needed that. And even though I'm on a scholarship, you need money to go out or buy books. And so I applied to as many jobs as I could, and I got 4 jobs on campus that I was excited to start. The first job was being an FYG, which is a first-year guide. So I would have basically trained, not trained, but been a helping hand for first-year students. The second job was being a biology TA. The third was a biology tutor. And the fourth was being a writer for the school newspaper. Of the 4 jobs that I had, 2 required you to undergo a 4-hour session divided into 2 parts based on diversity, inclusion, and equity, the DEI training program. I entered this Zoom meeting, which had 100 and some employees, student employees, with an open mind, but it was so obviously toxic. It wasn't even subtle. We were made to play a game. This website had a game where a statement popped up and all of us had to choose one of the option A, B, and C, D. A was sexist, B was ageist, C was transphobic, and D was racist. And we had to choose which of these forms of bigotry was that statement. That statement was a statement in vacuum, bereft of any context, and it was gamified.
There's a culture in the corporate world where legal compliance is a big issue, where they have mandatory trainings, everyone hates it, there's no evidence it does anything, but it's done for legal compliance. Well, in the early 2010s, a lot more of this comes onto campus. You have to have mandatory training about sexual harassment, about alcohol use, about microaggressions. There's an ever-enlarging campus bureaucracy around freshman orientation and around student life. These campus life staff, the bureaucratic staff, their goal is to shape incoming students to be warriors for social justice as they see it.
At the end of the training, a female student asked the coordinator of this event a question, and the question was, can you help me find my trigger? First of all, to drive a student to ask that question is insane. But we would assume that the coordinator would say, oh, bravo, you do not have a trigger, good for you. But instead, the coordinator of that event went on a 3-minute rant explaining how to actually find your trigger and how to find your trauma, and essentially tell that female student why you should be triggered. Instead of, great, you're not triggered by anything, don't be. And that to me exemplified what all of this was about. This was all based in some pseudo-scientific nonsense which has no basis in any psychology or any therapy. After all, the meeting was being conducted by a gender studies professor, not a psychologist.
Ideas are powerful, and there are ideas in psychology that are right, and there are ideas that are really wrong. And if you raise your kids or you structure an institution around terrible psychological ideas, you'll get terrible results.
We identified the 3 worst things young people are being taught, and we called them the 3 great untruths. The 3 great untruths are just terrible advice to give to anybody. They contradict ancient wisdom, modern psychology, and common sense. If you practice the 3 great untruths, you can pretty much guarantee that you're gonna be miserable.
The first week on campus, the first few days, is new student orientation, NSO, which I found thoroughly disorienting. There were some weird vibes. Like, I remember they have this event that's called Beyond Sex Ed, and I remember thinking, like, no one likes sex ed. Why would we want to go beyond it? It was a really strange setup because it involved upperclassmen sharing some really personal stories, sometimes of like healthy experiences, some of them of like abuse and rape. But I didn't really want to leave because there were counselors stationed at all of the doors in case anyone was upset, like to counsel them. And that just struck me as so odd that we were expected to listen to these very personal kind of oversharing, with all due respect to the students involved, but don't worry, there are counselors if your feelings are hurt. Seems a little strange to me. I mean, I had just gotten out of psych hospitals, and somehow it felt like Stanford expected students to be more fragile than the hospitals expected of their patients.
Schools, unfortunately, tend to teach kids that they're fragile. They're really not.
A wine glass is fragile. If you give it to kids to drink out of, they'll drop it, they'll play with it, it'll crack, and there's nothing good about that. So we don't give them glass, we give them plastic, because plastic is resilient. So if they drop it, it doesn't break, but it doesn't get better. So what's the word for things that get better when you drop them, when you challenge them, when you stress them?
Anti-fragility is this wonderful name for something that we all know is true, that they're particularly living things. They need some amount of stress. They need something to react against in order to grow and grow strong. Human beings, your body is anti-fragile, that essentially you need to challenge your muscles. So, for example, when people go up into space and suddenly have no gravity, when they come back to Earth, they find that their muscles are very weak. And that's because we are anti-fragile. We need a certain amount of stressors in order to grow.
People are anti-fragile. Children are anti-fragile. They actually need constant challenges. They need to sometimes explore and get lost. This is the way we grow. And if you overprotect kids, if you don't let them have experiences that are sometimes even frightening, in the long run, you're hurting them.
If you tell them that they'll be permanently harmed by words, one, you're doing them a horrible disservice, you're really underestimating, but two, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Subject: inclusivity training and indoctrination. Greetings to all the esteemed recipients. My name is Aryan, or Aryan Shankar Misra. I'm a Brown student from India. I'm writing this email to express my vehement opposition to what has become known as Alma College's diversity and inclusion training. A 4-hour session aimed at indoctrinating students with pseudopsychology and censorship. We were shown this video on microaggressions. It was a video in which microaggressions are like mosquitoes.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well-spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Oh, I can't watch this. I cannot watch it. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the whole thing.
And so these microaggression mosquitoes apparently bite some people more than they bite others.
The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more.
And that video then went on to show how complimenting somebody for their English is racist.
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Funnily enough, one of the recipients of this email, who I shall not name, complimented me for my English. He happens to be one of my favorite professors on campus. However, according to yesterday's inclusion and diversity training, he was a racist who engaged in a microaggression. I took it as a compliment. Of course I would. I mean, I've spent a lifetime trying to better my English, and I don't think I have the best English out there, but just being reaffirmed on a skill that you've worked a lot on is a compliment. And if anything, it is racist to assume that an international student is supposed to be good at English.
I think autistic people are absolutely more likely to commit microaggressions because just because of how autism is, autistics don't pick up on those subtle signals and don't have necessarily an innate sense of what is and isn't socially acceptable.
I have also noticed that the microaggressions that I was introduced to through college don't really relate to my interactions with African Americans. I know a lot of my friends themselves don't find certain things to be offensive that the woke mentality would have you think are offensive, and you can't ever ask that, you can't ever say that.
Saying America is the land of opportunity is considered a microaggression. Are you offended by that phrase?
It's considered a microaggression?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Really? It's very hard for me to understand why anyone would speak against the idea that America is the land of opportunity, because that is my life experience, is working to move to America in order to pursue my choice of profession, which would be to work in the music industry. And it does make me wonder who's writing the script on what's offensive and what's not. It's like the people with the power get to dictate what we experience and then silence our voices when we say that we don't experience that.
If you constantly tell students that they're going to face countless microaggressions every day, well, of course students are going to be miserable. It's like saying your entire well-being depends on other people not using particular words. That's like the exact opposite of empowerment.
You're teaching these students to strip naked, buck naked, and run straight through the wild jungles of West Africa and complain when you're being bit by those mosquitoes. You're teaching them to be weak.
This is an innocent animation, but it's actually really dangerous. Because that crazy, that was me. Right there with the mosquitoes jumping up in the air with her eyes all crazy looking. Because of the way I looked at the world, I was the one inflicting injury on myself. It was actually my choice. It's your worst nightmare at your doorstep. You know, someone's about to cross your path, you're walking down the street, and if they look at you the wrong way, that's the first microaggression of the day. And it's like, you know, you kind of just get stabbed with one knife and the day's already off to like this very violent start. So if I see someone like coming up with their dog, for example, and the dog's barking at me, I could interpret that as a racist microaggression on the part of both the dog and the dog walker. And then you go down the street and maybe it's another lone person and they're happy and they're like, hi. That could still be seen as a microaggression because they're feigning happiness and they're trying to look like they care about you. Before you even reach the end of the street, you've got like 3 knives stabbed in your body just from these interpretations of interactions. It's like playing out a horror movie every day.
We need to fundamentally change what we're doing to kids and give them back childhoods where they work out conflicts, have experiences, and develop their anti-fragility. Give them back childhoods where they have huge amounts of unsupervised free play. Free play is the main way that young mammals learn how to become old mammals. Kittens, puppies, squirrels, children. And if kids don't get a lot of free play, their brains don't develop, they become anxious and fragile.
I was probably 5 the first time I was allowed to leave home by myself. I could walk down to the corner store.
I mean, now that I think about it, it seems very strange, but I was very independent, very self-sustaining from probably easily 5th grade on, even probably before then. Hitchhiking with people I didn't even know. I'd just be like, I'm on my way to school, someone would stop by the side of the road. I'd get in their car and they'd drive me to school.
We used to hop on moving trains. I probably succeeded in doing it maybe 3 or 4 times tops and nearly killed myself all 3 times.
I just didn't know any better, but you learn as you go, but at the same time, like as far as failure, and I think Greg also would feel this way, is I don't even worry about failure because I know I've bounced back from so many horrible situations that are probably worse than anything I could possibly encounter.
Whenever anybody asks me about my own childhood, I always qualify. I'm like, listen, I was almost certainly way too free range. I would wish for anybody to have all the upside that I had as a kid with the independence, with none of the downside.
1990s, we just decided no more of that, at least not where I can't see you. You can't go outside and play in a park. You might be abducted.
America's Most Wanted has already captured 4 fugitives.
Parents are paranoid. They become paranoid because of what they see on cable TV and elsewhere, that if you take your eyes off your kid for 1 second, someone's going to snatch your kid. Someone calculated, if you look at the actual rate at which people are abducted by strangers, now they are sometimes abducted by the non-custodial parent, but there's only about 100 abductions a year by strangers. And so if you were to put your kid in a car and leave the car windows down and leave the car unattended, how long would you have to leave it there before your kid would be abducted? And the answer is something like 50,000 years.
I'm 22 years old. I have 2 older siblings. My sister is 35 now. My brother is 32. If I'm not mistaken, my sister went on her first date when she was 13, and I went on my first date when I was 21.
And that's really the story of Gen Z. So we used to think that these were basic things that students did before they showed up at college. And now, increasingly, many students are coming in having never had a job, a driver's license, a date, or a drink. They've not had the life experiences of previous generations. They're not as ready for independent living. And you might say, well, what are they doing with all their time?
And I'm like, all right, so mom doesn't really want me to have Facebook, so I doubt she'll want me to have Instagram. But I'm gonna do it anyways. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna download it. Like, she'll never know. My Apple account is like separate. And then my older brother was like standing across. So what was I? How old are you? You're 12. So he was 22. He was my age. He was in the kitchen and he was like, do you really think that's a good idea? And I was like, what do you mean, is it a good idea? He's like, I don't think you should do that. And I was like, well, I have to. Like, I'm gonna feel so left out if I don't. 7th grade, I got Instagram. 8th grade, I got Snapchat. 8th grade, I got Facebook after finally convincing my mom. Then I was on Tumblr. Like, it just was one after the other after the other.
So the rate of depression and anxiety has more than doubled on campus in recent years. Why? Why is this happening? Why is it happening at the same time in multiple countries and with a bigger impact on girls? What's been happening to girls since 2012 or so? The overprotection is a big part of it, but the gender difference especially points us to social media. Millennials, they didn't get social media until they were in college. Gen Z is defined by the fact that they got social media in middle school.
Mary got social media when she was in college. I got it in middle school. So it's evolved with me. You've seen me grow up on social media as compared to my brother and sister where they were already grown. When you're 13 years old, you are a sponge. Every person in front of you, you are pulling something from them to create you. To have access to social media was like having hundreds of thousands of people in front of me and trying to take little pieces of them to create myself.
So what most people don't realize about social media is that it was perfectly non-toxic when it first came out around 2004. Facebook, MySpace, Friendster. You just put stuff up about who you are, what bands you like. Social media changes radically between 2009 and 2012. The companies add the like button and the retweet button. Anything you do could go viral, either because you post it and people retweet it, or because somebody reposts it with a nasty comment, which goes viral. And this is very important. In 2009, teens didn't use social media that much. But by 2012, most teens were using it a lot. 2012 is also the year when rates of anxiety and depression start to go way up, especially for girls. So the timing and the sex difference make perfect sense. All kids are addicted to devices, but the boys are mostly playing video games, and video games are not actually as bad as many people think. What the girls are doing is putting something out and then waiting anxiously as people comment on it. So it's the social comparison. It's the fear of missing out. Also, girls' aggression is relational, and boys is physical. Girls can never get away if they're getting bullied.
Imagine the worst aspects of junior high school in your pocket 24 hours a day for the rest of your life. That's terrifying and exhausting. University of Michigan said the most important indication of bias is your own feelings. If you think that something wrong has happened every time you feel like a spike of emotion, that's not healthy. This is setting up students for paranoia and misery. The fact that I felt like I needed to die, that wasn't good instructions from my brain. You know, sometimes what your brain and your heart is telling you is the absolute worst advice you could possibly ever get.
The Buddhists and the Stoics gave us this wonderful insight. It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. This is the most widespread piece of wisdom around the world, that we don't experience the world as it is. We experience the world through the filters and distortions, the cognitive distortions, that we impose on it.
I used to trust my feelings to the point where I wouldn't do things. I was afraid to wake up because everything that I was going to do was going to take every ounce of energy and every ounce of fight that I had in me. Everything. And I'd obsess over it. Okay, when I go to the dining hall in the morning, who's am I gonna sit with? It's not the end of the world, it's just breakfast. You can eat breakfast by yourself. You can't eat dinner by yourself, but you can eat breakfast by yourself. On my first day of classes, I sat in the wrong lecture for 45 minutes and was too nervous to get up, even though I had another class. So one, executive functioning, I can't read a schedule. Two, my anxiety is saying, oh, you're gonna get in trouble if you stand up right now in front of all these new people and the professor. That was a day.
She would have full panic attack, like legitimate panic attacks in class. Hyperventilating, having to go out in the hallway, full legitimate anxiety attacks that would cripple her for days. She'd be in my office all the time and process through things and sometimes get mad at me about, trying to reframe it.
I remember leaving there mad at him sometimes. I'm like, I'm so sad. Why is he telling me I need to do this?
You give them reasonable parameters for their feelings at that point in time, and you say, all right, well, this part is legitimate. This part seems very reasonable. This part seems like it'll never happen. I'm an associate professor at Providence College in the education department. So my first year at Providence College was 2012. The students were more adult-like. They could handle their own situations. In the past year, I've seen more acute situations happening across the board. They want me to handle all of their problems for them. Sure, students are going through struggles, but at the same time, the best way out is through. You train the kid for the road, not the road for the kid.
Dr. Rodriguez is the teacher you don't always want, but the teacher you always need.
Yeah, I could tell I was not the professor she wanted.
He knows exactly when to push you, but to the point where if he pushes you too hard, he's gonna lose you.
She put in a ton of work on her own. She engaged in CBT. She basically reminds me a lot of Greg in the female form, who actually would have gotten help earlier than he did. Even when a situation continues to come up the same way it always did, she reframes it in a completely different situation, and she will actually come back and say, 2 years ago, this panic attack, this would have ruined my whole day. And now it only took about an hour out of my day.
Walking into a store may feel like the end of the world to me, and sometimes it does. But if I listen to that feeling every time, I'd never walk into a store.
After reading The Coddling of the American Mind, one thing I realized was these are the first signs of an ideology like this gripping the college. If you can cut it off here, you can prevent your college from being a victim. So I had sources for what I preached. So I attached a Harvard Business Review study showing why diversity trainings haven't worked, showing that if anything these trainings do is make the environment more tense and more toxic. I realized I didn't come to America to have a job which allowed me to say some things and didn't allow me to say other things. And so I decided to quit my jobs. I urge this institution to foster academia and not to engage in activism. Activism such as this has zero foundation in science, morality, or even simple common sense. I, as a brown international student, humbly reject my terms of employability. Yours truthfully and sincerely, Aryan Misra. And then I clicked the send button and it said, are you sure you want to send this? I said, no. And so I again read parts of it, just trying to convince myself it's okay. Do it. It's the right thing to do. Then I send it again and it goes through. But when you send an email on Gmail, it says unsend or undo. And so I click that. I undo the email. And I'm like, are you sure you want to send this? And I remember the final time, the third time I clicked send, shut my desktop, and I walked out of the room I was in. And all of a sudden, coming out of this dungeon of a room into sprawling bright light with students walking by, and it was this out-of-body surreal experience where you knew everybody you're seeing is going to see you differently from tomorrow.
I met this random guy called Abdul, and I was like, oh, really nice to meet you. He's really into Bollywood. I was like, I'm really into Bollywood too. So we just bonded over Bollywood at first. And then I remember I had dinner with one of his with him and one of his friends, and the guy just goes, "You're Muslim, yeah? Your prophet is the one who rapes 10-year-olds." And I was so taken aback at first. But then, like, I don't know where it came from. I just wanted to talk to this guy. I just wanted to really, like, you know, first of all, I knew he was wrong, obviously, but then, like, I didn't feel the, let's go, I'm gonna punch you type wrong. I just, you know, felt this like, oh my God, finally my chance to talk to someone, finally an opportunity to do the debate thing. And, you know, we started talking, and, you know, we, like, not just that day, like, you know, the next day after that, the next day after that. And eventually, somewhere along the line, Abdul then starts doing this thing where he's organizing, creating this meal series along with the professor. He starts putting out flyers everywhere. I missed the first meal series talk when they launch it, but I attended the next ones after that. I think the first one was, "Our safe space is bad for students." John Stuart Mill was a British philosopher whose primary argument is that, you know, free speech is really how truth comes about. It's never the sole preserve of one side. It's shared between both sides. There's complexity in truth, and free speech allows that to come alive. I would wear a black hoodie at night to go put up posters just so no one would recognize me. I still wanted friends. I was still out here like, yo, what's up? You know, like trying to get everybody to love me and know me. The social consequences and the cost of associating yourself with the Mill series were dire.
Tribalism is human nature. That doesn't mean we have to live that way, but it is our default. It's very easy to ramp that up, to get people to think us versus them. We're good, they're bad. It's often taught in this way. Let's take 18-year-olds who come into a college environment, and rather than looking out and seeing all the different people, let's teach them to see binary dimensions. Some people are white, some people are non-white. Some people are cisgender, some people are transgender. The point is, this is not just a way to look at different dimensions of identity. It's a moral framework. Because the people above the line are bad. They're privileged, which means they're oppressors. They oppress the good people, the people below the line.
At Stanford, anyone who was not white, straight, Christian, able-bodied, all these things, was like a better person somehow, just morally better. It really felt like there was a lot of moral status attached to it.
I was talking to these guys, you know, meeting new people, and this guy comes up to me, and he starts off with an apology, which is a very weird way to start a conversation. He starts off saying, "I have really wanted to know one thing for a very long time. I'm very, very sorry if this is offensive. I don't mean to offend you. I come from a good place." And this preface continues for 1 minute, and I'm out looking for what is he going to ask me. And his question is, "Do cows walk on the roads in India?" And I'm like, dude, yeah, they do. It's a very, very common thing, and it's not controversial to ask me something I have grown up watching. Yeah, cows walk on streets in India all the time, and cars bang into them, and the guy driving the car is lynched. But it's not controversial to try to understand where I come from. It's a very meek question. A culture where you're supposed to be careful, cautious, think a bajillion times before talking to a person of color, it makes it much, much more difficult for somebody who's brown or black to make white friends, especially when you're at like a demographically white college, because the white students are afraid they're going to get embroiled in some sort of a controversy. I send my email at 8 in the morning, and I'm refreshing my inbox every 5 minutes. That's a lie. I'm refreshing it every 2 minutes, hoping for a response. And the first response that comes is from a professor who's taught me, not going to name him, in support. It was responded directly to me. Then I shared this email on my Twitter, screenshots of it in its entirety. And that is when it truly began. When white people were subtweeting me, retweeting, and calling me a xenophobe, calling me racist, calling me sexist, calling me homophobic, calling me a dumb mother, and calling me whatnot. And this continued, and this continued for a while. The backlash that I faced on Twitter, very toxic, very unsurprising at the same time, was in juxtaposition to the support I got, which was all private. I got private Twitter DMs supporting me, private Insta DMs supporting me, private Snap supporting me, private emails from the professors supporting me. The support was reply to, the backlash was reply all. That hurt me.
Someone says, well, here's what I believe. And someone says, no, you're a racist. And then everybody jumps on them for being a racist. Of course, that's what happens on the left. On the right, it's different. The right has its own crazy dynamics. And there, it's not about racism. It's about being a traitor to the country. So each side uses social media to destroy the reputations of anyone who dissents, anyone who challenges them. And when we suppress dissent, when we intimidate dissenters, we make ourselves stupid, because other people challenging us make us smart. It's almost like they're an extension of our brain. So social media and cancel culture is like a way of shooting yourself in the brain.
The fallout made me feel alone. Not only are you alone, you are evil, good versus evil, us versus them. Anytime you see the world in this binary, you skew your vision and you're unable to understand the other person as simply a human. Students and administrators do not realize the mental health toll of being accused of bigotry by a mob. Being accused of racism when you know deep down you're not racist. Being accused of xenophobia when you're a brown immigrant international student in America is not easy to process.
So American society began to get much more politically polarized in the early 2000s. The clearest evidence of this is that the percentage of Americans who say that they would be upset if their child married someone from another race or religion, that's been dropping steadily since the 1960s. But the percentage who say they'd be upset if their child married someone from the other political party, that's been rising since the 1990s. And what this means on campus or in any institution that's almost all on the right or all on the left is there's a collective sense of us versus them. In the past, 20, 30 years ago, if there was, say, a Republican who was invited to give a talk on campus, okay, maybe you wouldn't go if you're a Democrat. Maybe you didn't want to hear that. But in the period we're talking about here, where students got much more into the culture war, it began to be, oh my God, we can't let that group give him a platform. It wasn't about learning, it wasn't about exposure to ideas, it was about this battle between good and evil.
Someone posted something about the Mill series, and I went to respond, and someone then called me a tool of white supremacy. I think he summarized a lot of what people were thinking. I'm not a white supremacist. It's not white supremacy in any form. Free speech is just, a code word for white supremacy. And, that's a very common thought today.
Your free speech has beneath white sheets. Your free speech has beneath white sheets.
And that's just maddening to me. You don't need freedom of speech to defend the powerful and the rich.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
You only need freedom of speech to defend the rights of minority points of view.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
It's John Lewis, the great John Lewis would say that if it wasn't for the First Amendment, the civil rights movement would have been a bird without wings. And what he meant by that, it just wasn't possible to have the kind of demonstrations, to have the kind of activism when the government had the power to shut you down.
You're coming in from Nigeria or from any country where free speech is sort of like a left liberal value.
It's been a week since Nigeria banned Twitter. The government says it blocked the platform because it was being used to spread fake news and has ordered prosecutors to arrest anyone who violates the ban.
It's like free speech, yes, for the press, yes, for let's speak our minds, let's have free discourse, because typically the government is the one trying to stifle free speech.
And that's why it annoys me when I come to America to see a political side that is usually squashed in other parts of the world being the ones that are doing the squashing. In India, free speech has historically been a liberal value. There's no doubt about that. Conservatives even now try to paint it as ban this movie, it offends us, boycott this product, it's advertising something that is against our values. Besides that, there are hate speech laws in India that governments misuse according to their benefit. A small example of this is recently a Muslim comedian was arrested on the grounds that he was about to say a joke about Hindu gods.
Popular comedian Munawar Farooqi is now in jail for 2 weeks.
He didn't say the joke, he was about to say a joke, and on that pretense, that man was arrested. In America, often the consequences of being cancelled are losing your job, mental breakdowns, depression, which are very bad in and of itself. But cancelling in India is more of an existential threat, where being cancelled can lead not only to you being fired, but your house being mobbed, you being killed, you being imprisoned by the government. All of this has happened, and all of this is happening all the time in India, with journalists, with activists.
Well-known journalist Gauri Lankesh has been shot dead. Reports suggest that unidentified men shot her 7 times.
America and American youth have been so protected from seeing the ugliness of retaliation that I think it's very hard for young people to conceive that this sort of bloodbath type existence can happen to them. So realize that you're just like your fellow humans across the sea. You're just like the Africans in Africa or the Europeans in Europe, and you could fall into the same revolutionary cycles that everyone else falls into. I grew up in Uganda. I moved to Tanzania for a little bit, and then I moved to South Africa. So when I was in South Africa during my high school days, we learned a lot about Nelson Mandela, the leader of the armed struggle against the apartheid government. He was like hopeless. He didn't know how to overcome this oppression that was like blanketed over the country. And unfortunately, he was put in prison for plotting an insurrection of sorts. But during that 27 years, he had a moment of turning where he realized that he could be released from prison, but if he didn't let go of the resentment, he wouldn't be free. And once he came out of prison, as apartheid began to crumble, retaliation against the apartheid regime and Afrikaners had already begun. People were fighting back and getting payback through acts of violence. But Nelson quelled that, and his presidency was marked with just incredible acts of forgiveness.
I cherish the idea of a new South Africa where all South Africans are equal.
He let the people who protected the apartheid president, the last apartheid president, protect him as well. He didn't fire them. He just showed incredible acts of mercy like that. Fast forward, once I moved to the States and I live in LA for a while, I forget about this. I had reached a point where I would cry for no reason. And I would just like black out and cry. It's this self-inflicting pain that it just like rips you open. Just feels like everything is like exposed and fragile. I realized that that's not the way I felt when I was in high school. Why is it that when I was 17, 16, I was so happy? But then I come to America and I feel horrible with no reason. I just feel terrible all the time. I will never forget that my life can never, ever be that harsh. So if he can forgive the way he did, how much more can I? So I remember this one day, I was like, you know what? Something needs to be done about this. I can't function. I can't sleep. I don't have any friends. I just prayed to God. I was like, God, show me what I'm doing wrong. And he just highlighted to me something very simple. I was offended, and I'm not allowed to be offended as a Christian. He was like, forgive them, release them. And it was such a simple thought, but it began to set me free. And I remember I just grabbed a journal and I just started writing down everything, all the microaggressions, every instance where I was holding on to an offense. I just started to write it down. What someone did, what someone said, why I interpreted their actions as racist, and giving grace to the people and saying, wait, that might have not actually been racism. They might have just been having a bad day or indigestion or something. So that seemed to begin to work, and I started to have more peace. I was a more sane person. And I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. So I never let up on that. And eventually, the worldview just began to fall apart.
By the end of the summer, I had made the definitive decision to switch from justice to kindness. I hadn't even turned 20 yet. Who said I know anything about justice? Justice is, the humankind has been debating that for centuries. Kindness, though, kindness is a lot more tangible. I had a pretty good sense of what was kind and what wasn't, and so I resolved to do more kind things, to kind of return to the kindness club. And I found that the more emphasis I put on kindness, the happier I was, and the more meaningful everything felt.
You don't have to be woke to care about the poor, the widow, or the orphan. Now I'm more effective at paying attention to instances of injustice because my energy is reserved for when there is a real atrocity happening. So letting go of wokeness, in my opinion, actually makes you more effective and have a longer endurance for real activism and real justice.
Back then, when I was a social justice advocate, I was tired, miserable, pessimistic, fragile, and stressed out, but about things that didn't really matter. And now I would say I'm excited, but also serene. I'm open to new ideas. I'm excited to learn. I seek out different perspectives instead of shying away from them. And I'm still stressed out, but I'm stressed about the things that matter.
Back then, when I was steeped in woke ideology, I was full of fear, full of anxiety. Now that I'm out of that and I'm thinking for myself, I'm much happier. I'm at peace. If I had continued in the woke mindset, today I probably would be an alcoholic. I also most likely would have become homeless because I couldn't function. And I can't stress how serious that was. You would have 1,000 daggers in you by the end of the day. It just feels like tiny knives stuck in you.
Tell me how it feels to take the knives out.
Oh Lord. I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it. Ugh. It feels really good. I'm lucky to have somehow found a way to do that. Taking the knives out is the best thing that happened to me. Because I feel like I lost my life for 6 years. And I don't know who I would be had that not happened. I wouldn't be a full human that I am today.
What advice would you give someone considering going to college?
Don't go.